Chaos Gardening, Part 2. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Finished last episode with some quotes from Dr. Christine Jones on the importance of photosynthesis. Today we explore the suggestions Dr. Jones makes to enable photosynthesis to operate at its maximal effect. She has 5 principles, your guiding ideas perhaps. 1. Green is good, and year-long green is even better. 2. Microbes matter. 3. Diversity is not dispensable. 4. Limit chemical use. And 5. Animal integration. So let's move to the first. Green is good, and year-long green is even better. This seems almost too obvious to discuss, but there are nuances I hadn't considered. Quote, while every green plant is a solar-powered carbon pump, it is the photosynthetic capacity and photosynthetic rate of living plants, rather than their total biomass, that drive the biosequestration of stable soil carbon. End quote. Photosynthetic capacity relates to the number and size of leaves in a given area and the amount of sunlight falling on them. The photosynthetic rate is the level of light to sugar conversion. So we're looking for full ground cover of leaves and for those leaves to convert the light falling on them to sugars at the highest rate possible. Podcast footnote. Most leaves are green, obviously. That means they are absorbing the blue and red ends of the colour spectrum but reflecting the green. And this means there's a huge chunk of available light not being used for photosynthesis. If plants absorbed all the available light, we wouldn't be seeing jungle green but jungle black. And this sort of shook me when I first realised it. End podcast footnote. These photosynthetic effects can be measured in the leaves of plants with a $30 tool called a refractometer, which is used to measure sugar levels. There's a link to a YouTube video explaining how it's all done in the show notes. I've ordered mine and it's winging its way here as we speak. The sugar levels reveal how well we are doing on the capacity and rate metrics. I'll be using this tool as I run various experiments in levels of chaos in the garden systems we've got set up. Now, green all year means as much to gardeners as it does to broadacre growers. Fukuoka's method of sowing the next grain crop before the last one is harvested is a great way to ensure this happens. In a garden situation, it can also mean sowing before harvesting, but will more likely mean having starts ready to immediately fill the harvested gaps in the garden. This does require more work and a space set aside for seed starting and the infrastructure to set it up. But I suspect the increased food quality from the plants being part of a continuously growing bed will more than cover the extra effort. You may remember the quote from last week re nutrient quality and quantity. If not, here's a quick reminder. This is again from Dr. Jones. Quote, soil dysfunction also impacts on human and animal health. It is sobering to reflect that over the last 70 years, the level of every nutrient in almost every kind of food has fallen between 10 and 100%. An individual today would need to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, and 4 to 5 times as many vegetables to obtain the same amount of minerals and trace elements as was available in those same foods in 1940. End quote. So I think it's really worth the effort to experiment at the garden level to move those measurements back to where they were. Number 2, microbes matter. Long-term listeners will know this is an obsession of mine. The good doctors too, it appears. Quote, the significance of the plant microbe bridge in transferring and stabilising carbon in soil is becoming increasingly recognised. But the soil microbiome heralded as the next frontier in soils research. One of the most important groups of plant-dependent soil-building microbes are mycorrhizal fungi. These extraordinary ecosystem engineers access water, protect their hosts from pests and diseases, and transport nutrients such as organic nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, and trace elements including copper, cobalt, zinc, molybdenum, manganese, and boron in exchange for liquid carbon. Many of these elements are essential for resistance to pest and disease and resilience to climatic extremes such as drought, waterlogging and frost." End quote. The fact that we are only just grasping the consequences of killing the soil microbiome is mind-boggling. The need to re-establish healthy soil biology is crucial. One of the benefits is growth in the depth and fertility of the recovered soils. The UN suggested back in 2015 that we might only have 60 harvests left if we continue to destroy our soils at the rate we are. There's a link in the show notes to that as well, and I've mentioned it in the past. Clearly, there are better ways than the cookbook over-hybridised, chemically and irrigation water-supported agriculture pushed by shareholder-run ag chemical and seed companies like Bayer, Syngenta et al. More on their modus operandi briefly under point 4 and in greater depth next week, where I'm pretty sure we can take the need for a biologically diverse and healthy soil as a given. 3. Diversity is not dispensable. This is where last week's chaos gardens fit in. They are examples of diversity taken to an extreme, but not as extreme as natural systems. The benefits from diversity become obvious from a simple level of complexity. Companion plants, dual cropping, alley cropping, and so on are examples of increasing diversity over monocultural practices. That such small changes can create such huge returns points to the importance of establishing and maintaining said diversity. As I've said elsewhere in other episodes of this podcast, the greater the complexity in a biological system, the greater, counterintuitively, is the stability of that system, particularly for those of us born and raised since the Industrial Revolution, where the more simple a mechanical system is, the more stable it is. Dr. Jones does give us all hope and somewhere to start. Quote, "However, this is referring to diversity, it doesn't need to be complicated. Something as simple as including 1 or 2 companions with a cash crop can make a world of difference. Indeed, it is becoming increasingly common to see peas with canola, that's rapeseed in parts of the world, clover or lentils with wheat, soybean, pigeon pea, faba beans, mung beans, and vetch with corn, flax with chickpeas, buckwheat and or peas with potatoes, and so on. Monoculture will hopefully be a thing of the past." End quote. Certainly agree with that last sentence. So there are ways to start growing the soil biology, and a way that allows us to take little steps towards our goal so we can see what's going on. Point 4, limit chemical use. Do I really need to say any more? I'll let Dr. Jones put it in a way that I've intuited before but never seen written down so succinctly. Quote, "No amount of NPK fertiliser can compensate for compacted, lifeless soil with low wettability and low water holding capacity. Indeed, adding more chemical fertiliser often makes things worse. This is particularly so for inorganic nitrogen and inorganic phosphorus, N and P. An often overlooked consequence of the application of high rates of N and P is that plants no longer need to channel liquid carbon to soil microbial communities in order to obtain these essential elements. Reduced carbon flow has a negative impact on soil aggregation, as well as limiting the energy available to the microbes involved in the acquisition of important minerals and trace elements. Lack of trace elements increases the susceptibility of plants and animals to pests and diseases." End quote. It's not real good for humans either, just quietly. Another example of the misplaced use of chemicals I heard this week comes from the Cover Crop Strategies podcast, link in the show notes. Basically, the situation described was one of slug infestation in maize crops. One section of the maize crop had been planted with neonic-treated seeds to stop insect predation on the seeds. The other section hadn't been so treated. Observation showed the slugs, predators, arriving in both plots. But the slugs in the treated area took up some of the neonics and were poisoning the predator insects. The untreated area was not affected by the slugs as the predators did their job, or perhaps more accurately, exploited their niche and were able to reproduce. The slugs were not able to so do. More on this next week, where I'm taking a deeper dive into unintended consequences in the agricultural sector. 5. Animal integration. I've pointed out in any number of other episodes the importance of this. Animals and plants co-evolve together. As diversity increases, so too do available niches. The point of animal integration is to use the animals to maintain the ability of plants to grow. Regenerative grazing, large mobs moving quickly across the landscape, appears to be best for the animals and the plants, and, most importantly, the soil. In Dr. Jones's words, quote, "The way livestock are managed has a significant impact on soil function. In actively growing perennial pastures, it is vitally important that less than 50% of the available green leaf is grazed at any one time. Retaining adequate leaf area reduces the impact of grazing on photosynthetic capacity and enables the rapid restoration of biomass to pre-grazed levels. Significantly more forage will be produced during the growing season and more carbon sequestered in soil if the pasture is grazed tall rather than short. In addition to maintaining photosynthetic capacity through management of leaf area, the height of pasture has a significant effect on moisture retention, nutrient cycling and water quality." End quote. How this works at the garden level takes some creative thought. Chicken tractors, a few ducks, geese on larger areas are all options, as are rabbit and or guinea pig tractors. It just requires, as I say, some creative thought. The benefits and complexity are many. Putting green matter through an animal also creates, in inverted commas, compost much more quickly than building a pile, so I'm all for it. So remember the 5 principles. 1. Green is good, and year-long green is even better. Microbes matter. Diversity is not dispensable. Limit chemical use. And lastly, animal integration. And think about applying them to your garden, smallholder or broadacre farm. Even in little steps, it would appear that the smallest change can start to bring rapid results. And of course, as I've been saying, there's a link to a Udemy course in the show notes entitled Growing a No-Dig Garden, if you'd like some formal assistance in your gardening. Or you can also go to or send people to episode 207, where I discuss growing a quick response garden to get yours happening swiftly. Remember, in this unusual time, if we put in the groundwork now, we can all change the world, even if it's only a little bit to start with, and we will begin the process of decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.